what makes Amarillo a possibility for you guys? I mean, if the real estate market is still iffy at best,
George, this is the best time as far as I'm concerned, because it truly is the perfect storm type of an environment. You have a situation where when you take a look at the public sector, and this is just kind of the whole argument as it relates to public-private partnerships, but you've got an environment where you've got declining revenues for different cities, whether it's hotel, motel tax, ad valorem, sales, all the revenue streams across the board. Some cities are faring better, but you generally speaking have declining revenues, and so every city out there is looking at, all right, what do we cut by way of expenditures without affecting services in an adverse way. And so you've got cities that are looking at what are things that can be done to increase our revenue streams. And at the same time, one of the things that every city is looking for from an economic development standpoint is how can we continue to prime the pump and generate additional economic growth within our community. And so cities throughout the United States are constantly looking at what are projects that can be done to be able to move forward with that. And that's the public sector perspective. Look at it from the private sector perspective. I've already shared with you that it is, I'm not going to say impossible, but virtually impossible to go to a bank today and secure capital for a greenfield startup project. It's just very, very difficult to do that. We're starting to see some loosening of the credit constraints, but it's very difficult for that to happen. So when you have that type of an environment, what a public-private partnership will afford us the opportunity to do is say, all right, well, let's take some of the capital that we have, the capital both from an equity perspective, whether it's sub-debt or mezzanine debt or senior debt from a conventional lender. What can we bring to the table to be able to partner with a public sector so that in a larger mixed-use development like what we're talking about in Amarillo, where you can have some economies of scale, efficiency, if somebody's going to build a public asset in the downtown area, we know that there's underground infrastructure, there's cost associated with that. To the extent that we can share in those costs, because it would be additive to the overall development, then let's talk about how we can do that. What that does is that provides a gap benefit for all parties. From a city's perspective, the city needs to look at this, and I'm sure that they are. The city needs to look at this as if we are investing dollars, if we're investing taxes, if we're investing resources, whatever the case may be, what is the benefit that we are going to receive? And it needs to be looked at just like an investment. And again, I'm certain that the leadership in Amarillo will do this as to if we're going to invest $1, what are the tangible and intangible benefits that we're going to be receiving for our citizens out here? In the city of Sugar Land, we passed a policy where basically it had to be at least, I think it was a 10.5% internal rate of return on direct benefits. So you have to be able to stand in front of your citizens and say, and if we're going to invest this is the return. And at the same time, to the extent that we can create a redevelopment in the downtown area, and we saw this in Waco on a first-hand basis, where we put capital from a redevelopment perspective, all of the surrounding area, the surrounding property owners started to see this upward pressure in their overall values. That affects the city in a very positive way. It affects them from the standpoint of their base as it relates to the taxable values goes up, which enables them to be able to look to other citizens and say, great, we can now reduce our taxes even more to all of the citizens within our community. And to the extent that we can use some of the creative structuring that we've been able to use in the past to be able to have access to federal funds, state funds, again, to be able to bring those as an investment into the downtown area of Amarillo, again, it all becomes additive and continues to promote the overall economic drivers in the downtown area. I see so many similarities to downtown Amarillo to what I saw in downtown Waco when I first arrived. And I saw it as an opportunity for both the public and the private sector to be able to work together and in effect to assist in helping that economic impact in the downtown area. But more importantly, from a quality of life perspective, how can we add assets in the downtown area that can be used as a marketing tool the next time, whether it's Downtown Amarillo Inc., whether it's the Chamber, whether it's the city leadership, economic development, the next time they're meeting with the chairman of a company that has 100 employees or 500 employees, to be able to say, here's the menu of amenities and services and look at what's going on in the downtown area. This is why you want to come to Amarillo. And all of those type of things, as long as you can continue to show fiscal responsibility, are a tremendous asset for a community. Again, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's why we're focusing on Amarillo.
Well, what kind of commitments have you in any of the discussions that you've had with what you refer to as the leadership in Amarillo? What kind of commitments have you had? What public commitments are in place to you? That is to say, has the city promised you anything?
Oh, absolutely not. Nothing. Any dollars that we have spent, we've spent from the standpoint of how can we help to be able to put together some type of a structure. This is an evolutionary process, George, as I'm sure you know, and it's something that we've been involved with both on the public sector as well as on the private sector, from the standpoint of what do the citizens want. Sure, there's the economic consequences of what can be afforded. But more importantly, what do the citizens want, and also what don't they want? And there's an overall process that needs to be developed as it relates to how can we get hundreds, if not thousands, of citizens of Amarillo to be involved, to be engaged, to have the buy-in of what do we want the vision of downtown Amarillo to be. And as that process goes forward, you know and I know that it will start out with a number of items from a wish list standpoint, and as you continue to refine that wish list of, all right, now what can be afforded? What can be afforded from the public sector? If the public sector invests this, what is the return? If we as a private sector investor invest a dollar, what is our return? And that overall mixture of what those assets are continues to get refined as you move forward. And so that process hasn't even begun. And that's basically what we're focusing on is, all right, well, that will be the first step as we move forward. It's really interesting because a lot of times when you start this type of a development process, many people want to jump to the conclusion, and when I say the conclusion, meaning what's the end result? What are we going to see here? And they want to look at what's the execution, how do we get to that point? But there's a whole planning process associated with that. And I'd say the difference between us and perhaps some others, there's a lot of consultants that can come to the table, a lot of consultants that get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And again, I'm not knocking them. They play a great role. But there's a lot of consultants that will come in and say, here's what you should do. Yeah, here's what we recommend. Here's the asset. You should do this. And many times those plans end up on the shelf because they're not coming with, okay, here's what we recommend should be done. And it's not just us recommending that. Here's the validation that the citizens want this. And oh, by the way, here's the capital that we're bringing to the table to make it happen as a principal, as opposed to just a third-party consultant that doesn't have a stake in the success of the project.
The city has paid almost $500,000 to Downtown Amarillo Inc. And they've done studies. They've got this comprehensive plan that went through what Downtown Amarillo Inc. is saying is great public participation. I think that's...
Sure. And I've seen all that.
Well, then how is that... How does that fit in, then? If
It's a great starting point. I mean, if that's an asset and a high-level bubble plan, if you will, as it relates to this can be done in this area. It fits. It's something that the citizens were involved in this process. The citizens want this. All right, well, great. Who owns the land? Can it be acquired? Is it city land? Is it something that there's a way that we can sit down with the current landowner to partner with them on an overall development? How can all of these things be accomplished? All of that, like I said, it's a great starting point in order to move forward. But I don't think there's been any analysis of, all right, what is this going to cost? And if so, how is that going to be? What's the capital structure associated with that? And so all of those pieces need to continue to be analyzed as we move forward in connection with this.
How much confidence might you have then in some of these studies at this point, if these are just starting points? Let me give you an example. Downtown Amarillo contracted with this leisure group to do a study of this multi-use venue. They didn't even take into account the fact that there's the Potter County Memorial Stadium, that Reunion Sports Group was in default. It was almost like it was some sort of a classroom study done in a vacuum. How much confidence can you have in that kind of a study?
Well, look, I think many of the contractors that have been engaged in connection with this process are very reputable firms, and we look forward to continuing to analyze that, refine it. That's part of the overall equation that we need to continue to look at. Every project that we're involved with, it needs to be validated. We need to make sure that we've got third-party support that understands and can help analyze what are the benefits, what are the consequences, what are the assumptions, economic, all of those different components. So we're going to continue to use that information, and we may very well go back to many of those same folks and say, great, and again, this is at our expense. Let's modify this. Let's go back and broaden the scope, or let's refine the scope. You looked at it from this perspective. What happens if we add additional things? And so, again, I think all of this information is a great starting point, and it all goes into the mix, if you will, as you're trying to make a well-informed decision.
To what degree have you talked to folks in Amarillo, and to whom have you spoken? I mean, I understand that Downtown Amarillo Inc. approached you guys.
Right.
Can you tell me about that process?
Yeah, we were approached. I don't remember the exact month, whether it was December or January, but I think in February of this year, we met with Melissa in Waco, and met with different folks. You mentioned Larry Groth, and there were several others that we opened up the doors and made introductions so that Melissa could see what the development process had taken place, what we had done, and so that's basically when it started. But yeah, you're right. They approached us from the standpoint of, all right, if we had our wish list of the type of developer to come in that has both the public sector experience as well as the private sector experience, they've been involved in the development both on the public and the private side of hotels, entertainment venues, residential, retail, commercial, and more importantly, they also have the ability of bringing capital to the table of a development standpoint to help provide capital into downtown Amarillo. I think there was a whole laundry list of criteria, and according to Melissa, as they started going through that process, and I know that they spoke to several other development firms. I don't know who they all are, but I know that we received that call and said, you guys kind of we checked the box on a lot of these different components. We'd like to have conversations with you, and that's when it started back in February.
And those conversations continued until the invitation to come on up here and talk to the commission a few weeks ago?
We've been to Amarillo over probably 10 to 15 times in the last 9 months.
Okay.
And then each time, there's a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, probably over 100 different folks that we've met with in Amarillo. And again, it's citizens that were involved in the process of the vetting of kind of the downtown master plan. And again, I do refer to leadership as it relates to commissioners, mayor, city managers, assistant city managers, trying to really understand what all is going on and what the goals and objectives are from a public perspective in Amarillo. So, yeah, we've had a number of visits, a number of conversations, and getting back to your initial question, if the commissioners say, we've decided we just don't want to move forward on anything in the downtown area, then that's their prerogative, and we walk away, and whatever we've spent, and we're done.
In all of these visits, have you gotten some indication who your local partners might be?
No, except from the standpoint that there's a number of local developers, a number of local subcontractors, general contractors, capital sources that I know have expressed an interest in wanting to participate as we move forward. But again, we're not in the position at this point in time to really have any serious conversations with anybody, but we have spoken with a number of folks, and that's kind of what our approach would be. And kind of Waco's probably a poor example, just using the Michael Ray situation, but he was a local developer that we thought we made a good decision, and quite honestly, he had shown that he had the ability to construct. He surrounded himself with good folks, and we ultimately had to come in and clean up a mess there. But in the case of Amarillo, we want to go through that same process, the same vetting process, meeting with folks, because we think it's important to have a number of local partners, and I say partners, but from a development standpoint, lending standpoint, just a number of different areas. I don't think that that's appropriate at this point in time, because there's still a lot of folks that we want to talk with, and I don't really want to be disclosing we've spoken to this group and have somebody think, oh, well, there's already a prearranged relationship, because there's not.
Yeah.
All we're doing is interviewing folks, talking to people at this point in time. And again, the commissioners may come back and say, we've decided we don't want to move forward. And if that's the case, I don't want to really be in a position to be talking about who we've spoken with and who we haven't yet.
Well, but how do you protect yourself from those kinds of partnerships in the future?
Well, I think
I guess, excuse me, let me just end. How did those go south in the first place?
Well, I've acquired over 100 companies over the last 30 years, and anytime you step into an acquisition like that, many times they were turnaround situations, and when you step into those type of situations, you sometimes have to deal with current partners, and so how do we solve that so that doesn't happen in the future? I think what you do is you make one phone call to a guy by the name of George Schwartz and make sure that you get all the background information. You make sure that everything that you do is very transparent, very public. You make sure that you have a lot of people that are involved in the process, such as yourself. I'm not blowing smoke. I'm not. But when we did we set up an entertainment visioning task force in Sugar Land, we had a lot of people that were against it. We brought them into the process. We put them on the committee to help us to go out. Let's look and see what type of entertainment assets we want in our community. That's how you gain support, by being open and honest with people and forthright. And so that's how you overcome those type of issues. The agenda here, we're a private developer, sure, we'd love to make money along the way. But at the same time, any type of a public-private partnership that we're involved with, you can't just focus on the developer. But believe me, sitting on the other side of the dais from a public sector perspective, there were plenty of developers that came in and said, all right, well, enough about me. Let's talk about me one more time, about the private developer. We look at this in kind of the antithesis of that. We look at it as, all right, if we're able to come in and find some creative solutions to be able to help from an economic development standpoint, to be able to bring in additional streams of revenue, and in many cases, newfound revenue streams that don't even exist today, that can add to the coffers of the city, which enable them to be able to reduce the taxes to others. That's the type of a very positive goal that I would love to have you write a story about. And that's the type of an approach that we have to take as we're coming into this. It's not about the private developer. It's about how can this partnership provide a net-net benefit to everybody in the community, and how can that community be involved as a part of that process. And if the community is involved as part of that process and they embrace it, even if you take your fiercest adversary on a particular issue, getting them involved in the process, they may have a great point of view that, all right, well, how can we overcome that? How can we accomplish this so that you have all of these people, so that you have buy-in, and it's done in a very transparent manner where everyone is engaged, everyone's seeing it. That's the type of approach that we want to take.
When are you going to tell that to Melissa Daly and DAI?
I don't know all of the past history.
And if you want transparency, how are you going to convince them to be transparent? I mean, if you end up signing some sort of contract with the city, are you going to advocate saying that because it's a real estate deal, that it's not subject to the Public Records Act?
No. No, I think any type of an agreement that we would have with the city would be subject to Open Records Act.
Okay. But what about the rest of my question?
Well, quite honestly, George, I mean, of course I would advocate openness and transparency. In many respects, I just extended an invitation to you if we are selected to be involved in this process. I don't know how more transparent that can be. And again, I don't know all the history as it relates to Downtown Amarillo, Inc. I mean, I first learned about them back in February. I do want to be open, honest, transparent, forthright with you and anybody else in the media.